All right. My name is Dan Taylor. I am Director of Communications at CEW. Thank you for joining us this morning for this webinar. Andrea sends his apologies. I guess being a dad and being a full-time hustler is a tricky thing to balance. So he's asked me to step in. Today we are going to be talking about investing and scaling in Iberia, a European perspective. Now, obviously, Iberia, we're going to be talking about the dynamic ecosystems of Portugal and Spain, and hopefully exploring their roles within the broader European venture landscape. You don't need me to tell you that the market right now is, as Stefan and I were discussing before this show, surfing choppy waters. Maybe it's good for Stefan. We're going to find out. But Iberia continues to emerge as a hotspot of innovation and investment. Today's discussion, I have to do the shout out. It is part of the deal. It is part of the co-investing project, an EU-funded initiative aimed at connecting and enhancing transparency across Europe's diverse investment ecosystems. Hopefully, I got that right. They're the ones funding this, so let's hope that I got the words right. Obviously, you can see our esteemed panelists that have joined us today. I'll let them give a brief introduction, but we've got Nico Goulet from Adara Ventures, Itxaso de Palacio from Notion, and Stefan Moraes from Indico. Itxaso, can you give us a 10-second intro, who you are, what you do, all the fun stuff?
I'm amazed how well you pronounce my name. I don't think ever, apart from Stefan, who also did another interview with me, honestly pronouncing it so properly. But yeah, my name is Itxaso. I'm a general partner at Notion Capital. We are a specialist fund based in London. We invest in B2B software. We've been doing this for 15 years. So we pioneered a little bit the B2B software investment in Europe. We are entrepreneurial and an operator mindset fund. Everyone within the company had either an operating or entrepreneurial background before joining Notion. And I'll probably add to that we come as a team, because when you get an investment from Notion, you don't only get an investor who sits on the board, but rather you get an investor with a platform team and go-to-market team. And so we try to really be there in good times and in bad times, and support you and guide you through the journey. Just from this conversation, just to frame it, even though we are in London, myself, I'm Spanish. You already figured that out from my accent, right? I can't hide that one. My name is different because I'm from Basque Country, so my name is Basque. And we've done a couple of investments in Iberia, including Kobe, that we sold a couple of months ago, a month ago or so, to Plaxi, maybe a Bubble in Portugal that I will talk about in a little bit, and Adara, which is a Spanish founder. And then we have a bunch of small investments here and there in the earlier stages.
Lovely. Thank you for that. Nico, you want to jump in?
Yep, Nico Goulet, one of the founding partners of Adara Ventures. We've been around for about 20 years. In fact, next year is our 20 years since the first closing of our first fund. Investing out of Spain, Madrid, mainly in B2B enterprise plays. So a lot of cybersecurity, a lot of data plays, more recently some digital health. Currently raising our fourth generation of funds, which is going to be actually divided in two segments. One is going to be an energy fund, and the other is going to be a more traditional flagship, looking at the same sectors as we've done traditionally. We already have the closing on the energy fund, and we should be moving towards a closing on the flagship fund within the next few weeks, which we are hopeful for. Our focus over the last 20 years has really been on companies that were globalizing quickly, originally out of Spain, but very quickly we started doing stuff also in other European countries, including Portugal, including the UK, where about 25 to 30% of our dollars get invested. And looking at companies which, where the origin of the company can be in a given country, but very quickly they become global players. So the notion of where a company is a little bit diffuse. We can talk about where companies were born and what that impact might have on them going forward, or what sort of what sort of attributes it gives them. But at the end of the day, I think all of us here are involved in companies where the whole point is for them to be increasingly global from day one. And that's definitely a trend we've seen over the last 20 years, more and more, and particularly in companies coming from Portugal, coming from Spain. The ability to be global from day one is markedly different from what it was 20 years ago. We're a small team, growing actually, but small, about 15 people out of Madrid, and we are quite international in the team. I would say we have about 7 nationalities involved. People from Scotland, people from France, a few Spaniards to keep our national flag going there. But all in all, I think our objective is to become one of the I wouldn't say a pan-European, but a specialist fund that operates in the 5 countries that are our focus, which are Spain, Portugal, France, Italy, and the UK.
Awesome. Great. Stefan, wrap us up. I mean, that's it. One of the reasons that I ask panelists to introduce themselves is because it gives me a sense of how well you've prepared for this panel. And I think you've actually just covered questions 4, 6, and 12 just in those intros. So Stefan, you might have seen some of these questions ahead of time. If you can cover 2, 6, and 8, we can all go have lunch.
Exactly. I'll try to do that a little bit in a shorter version, maybe. So Stefan Moraes, managing partner and founder of Indico Capital Partners, VC early stage fund based out of Lisbon. Been doing VC for about 10 years. We've been involved in 6 unicorns and have about 50 companies in the portfolio. We're currently in our 5th fund, and basically the companies have raised 3 billion, and they're mostly B2B SaaS companies and a few marketplaces as well. We started by focusing primarily in companies related to Portugal, and I say related because a lot of the Portuguese founders are in the US, and so we've invested quite a lot in the US. And we've also invested obviously in Spain, and more recently we've started investing in Italy as well. So I would say we are an early stage Southern European focused fund, and we also have a blue fund, which is kind of pan-European and even with investments in the US. And basically, like my friends Nico and Itxaso said, we focus on companies that go global from day one, because that's the only way to sort of make it happen in the global VC market. So that's basically it.
Right. Excellent. Okay, thank you for that. That gives me a bit more insight of exactly who I'm talking to. I did do my research as well, but hearing it straight from the horse's mouth is always best. Let's get the show rolling. This is for all of you. All jokes aside, I mean, yes, we know the weather's great. We know the food is great. That's great, but that doesn't necessarily make for all things that an ecosystem desires and needs. So again, for all of you, and I'll let you fight it out who goes first on this one, but what makes Portugal and Iberia an attractive tech hub within Europe? What there's Berlin, there's London. What makes it different, and what makes it best or better?
I can go.
So
yeah, we all know, I think, if we look at those hubs, tech hubs rankings, we all know that cities like Madrid, Barcelona, and Lisbon are basically have emerged very much on the top, and many times, in fact, they are in the top 5 after just London, Berlin, Paris, and Amsterdam. So that's a reality. I think there are 3 things. I will mention 3 things. I'm pretty sure everybody else on the call will have some other ideas, but I will mention 3 things. One of them, and I think we all would agree, is the critical mass of talent. And that comes down to very good technical talent from good universities at a good price, let's say. Great people that you can attract for an amazing quality of life come to Portugal, come to Spain, and they want to live well, and you can hire really good talent either locals or coming from abroad. The second thing is smart money. And I think this is very, very important. Smart money. In the last specifically 10 days, I know Nico has been operating for 20 years, but I'm pretty sure you were one of the only ones in Spain doing a little bit of venture at the time. In the last 10 years, a lot of funds have emerged, and funds who understand the tech game, startup game. They understand what are the terms, the support that the founders need. They have empathy with the founders. They know that they cannot take a 30 to 40% of the business in a seed round, because otherwise there is no way anybody invests there. And that was not happening before. So this is smart money. Those are investors who are pushing founders to go global from day one. They are not looking locally. They are looking to build big businesses. And I think that is absolutely important. Local funds, even though they are small, they are very good. And I think that's definitely, we need to acknowledge that. And the third one I would probably say is the growth mindset. There is a clear growth mindset that you can see today in those Iberian cities, which I'm not sure if we could see it again 7, 8 years ago. And that comes a lot from that critical mass of people who have worked at unicorns and other very fast growing businesses. They've been educating, they are the alumni of those businesses. They learn what it takes to build a big business, and they have gotten that virus of going global and going global fast. And I think those three things are very, very important, I would probably say. Just to start.
Building up the flywheel. Yeah.
Correct.
If I could add to that, I mean, I totally agree with Itxaso. That's exactly what it is. Great technical, flexible, and hardworking local talent. That's really, really key. Then something related to the food and sunshine. Very easy to attract great foreign talent. I think one thing you saw maybe 10 years ago was great technical talent, but maybe not so much in sort of sales and marketing. And now you can actually find in Iberia increasingly world-class talent in terms of sales and marketing and other functions that you need to grow your company, and that was not there before. This is in general accompanied by fairly lower costs compared to Northern Europe and certainly to the US, and that's important also. And it comes from having these sort of great universities and great sort of living conditions that people want to have a balanced life and to sort of make an impact in the world. The other thing which Itxaso also touched upon, I wanted to reinforce, is this mentality of going global from day one. And the reason is that when you have a fairly small, this you see particularly in Portugal, but also increasingly in Spain, when you really don't have a local market, and when people realize that the global market sometimes needs to start with the US because that's where you either sink or swim, the fact that you have no local market is an advantage. Sometimes countries that are really big or kind of medium-sized big, the companies fall into the trap of staying local for a long time. That does not happen with Portuguese companies because they have no local market. And increasingly doesn't happen with the Spanish companies that also have targeted many times the sort of Latin America. But when you look at the really big success cases in the younger generation of Spanish companies, they're actually targeting the US as well.
Sure. Yep. I mean, just off the top of my head, when you were mentioning that, it makes me think of France and Germany immediately.
Yeah.
Huge home markets. I saw it day in, day out as a journalist. I see it day in, day out working in communications. French and German firms in particular tend to stay at home because, well, there's enough money there and they can get by and survive for quite some time. Stefan, let's talk about and Nico, I do want to get your input on this, but I want to frame it a different way. Stefan, you're on the ground in Portugal. Sell me on Portugal. What strengths does the Portuguese ecosystem have that I'm not going to find in Spain, and I'm certainly not going to find in Germany or France?
Look, I think that given the nature of the economy and sort of the hard times that we've had over the decades, it is true that a lot of people, when they graduate, they go abroad, but many come back and many stay. and increasingly they stay, and increasingly they come back. And so there's this deep sense of nothing is taken for granted. I think you've seen recently the emergence of corporates with, very big corporates, US corporates paying well, but traditionally, the job market has not been so strong. And that has created, for the good and for the bad, a certain hunger, not literal, but a certain hunger to sort of prove yourself and to work hard and make things happen. And I think, the Portuguese kind of ethos has always been of flexibility, and where people sort of try to solve problems. And I often say that in the industrial age, if you were a little bit too flexible and thinking outside of the norms, that was not good for your factory. You just have to do your work and get it done ABC every day. But in the startup world and in a more flexible and creative economy, actually, this mentality of solving problems and doing things differently, which sometimes is a hindrance when you want to do things always in the same way, in the startup economy, in the creative economy, it's actually a big plus. So that's why we've seen, not only in the startup world, but in the creative industries, a lot of great companies coming out of Portugal, a lot of great events being born and happening here. And I think we really have a particular advantage of not having a market, and at the same time having very creative, but a very, very hardworking population that also tends to stay in the same job for a little longer. I think what we see, for example, in the US and in some European markets where there's a huge turnover and people just stay on the job for 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, and are constantly changing, you don't see that as much in Portugal, and that's great. And then, of course, Lisbon and the whole country has been a huge magnet for a number of reasons. I'd say the only comparable place in Spain is like Barcelona, and obviously bigger even than Lisbon and for longer. But you attract a you have a capacity to attract so much talent from abroad because of this idea of the lifestyle, that you end up having a very, very diverse ecosystem. And I'd say that now Lisbon is like a mini London, really. There's people from all over the world. People keep on, every week there's people getting in touch saying, oh, I'm going to be moving to Lisbon. I'd love to speak to you. I'd love to sort of present my idea and raise capital and so on. And that's a huge advantage for the ecosystem.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. I have a number of friends who have also relocated to Lisbon. Nico, I want to put you up, defend Spain. And I will say this as well. I mean, CEW's own founder, Kathy White, she what's the phrase she likes to use? She and her husband exited before the UK Brexited. So there was this mass immigration to Europe while we were still part of the European Union. So I know and have experienced firsthand the draw of Barcelona. Nico, talk to me, sell me on Spain. Why, if I'm I am a top talent and I want to relocate, why should I be going to Spain over Portugal?
Well, I don't think there's really
I mean, other than Adara
competitive
Ventures
view between
there,
Spain and Portugal. I wouldn't, I would say that Spain has a lot of the characteristics that Stefan was playing out. I'd say historically, when we were investing way back 20 years ago, our thesis was basically very good engineers and very cheap asset, cheap, high quality asset. So that has changed with the still high quality and product development talent itself is building increasingly. Also create these global companies from day one in Spain. Part about Spain is indeed, part of it is the lifestyle. I think there are certain industries that benefit in Spain specifically. And this is an angle that we haven't talked about yet, but one of the reasons we've done a lot of cybersecurity is that the reality is that a lot of the Spanish banking system actually had a very global footprint compared to even other European countries, or very much so compared to the US companies, right? So the Spanish banks very quickly had had a footprint which made their cyber risk profile extremely high. And these were essentially companies that were out there globally sourcing cyber solutions, which made local entrepreneurs in the cyberspace having to compete against global players very early on, and created a very strong ecosystem of cybersecurity companies in Spain. And this effect of having strong global buyers of technology close by is very, very important. And I think Portugal has a strong, Portugal is a smaller country, Stefan pointed out, and has been, the notion of having to be global in Portugal is true not only for startups, it's true for the whole industrial and commercial sort of footprint of Portugal. So Portugal is a very, very global country from day one, right? From the moment everybody's starting up their companies, and even for the larger companies. And this phenomenon in Spain happens in certain industries very strongly, including the banking sector, including the utilities sector, including the telecom sector, which traditionally have been very, very expansive. It's true to Latin America, and in our view, one of the points that was made, about the Latin American sort of growth axis from Spain, we think that the growth axis on the consumer side is a bit of a fallacy. It's basically something which has not necessarily worked out so well for a lot of companies. But what is true is that the fact that a lot of the companies, industrial companies, so for B2B companies to be working with Santander, you're going to have a very strong global exposure to all the affiliates of Santander. If you're a B2B company working with Telefónica, you're going to have an extremely high and strong global footprint. And that makes it quite attractive, because you do need to have customers, strong, powerful customers close by to be able to start up. It's good you can sell to the US from Spain, but if you can be in Madrid and sell to Madrid to a global footprint, it's even better. And I think that's the one thing that I would highlight about Spain. And that's, it's continuing and it's growing, and it continues to be very strong. On the weather, I think we're at a par. If you depends whether you, it depends.
But I could add something else, actually, Nico.
Decide, but
Exactly. Here it's colder, but I can certainly add something in defense of Spain. I mean, if you look at the exits pattern, because also the VC industry in Spain is older and more mature. Number one, you have more funds which are with more capacity. So the bigger funds and older with more capacity, with more expertise. And then you have kind of an exit market, particularly in small transactions. You've actually seen, Spanish companies being sold locally, not the huge transactions, but the little ones. And in Portugal, that is not possible because there's no buyers, right? So the Spanish market is more mature, has more volume, and therefore, yes, they need to go global, but you can start stronger locally, and you can also sell your company locally if needed at certain level, and you can't do that in Portugal. So you really have to do global and be huge, or you'll go nowhere.
Right. Okay. Cool. Excellent. Nico, you dropped out a little bit there, and I think actually that that typifies the Spanish attitude, folks. If you haven't figured out, Nico is actually still on holiday. I think hence the T-shirt and the Nico, are you at the beach or are you in the mountain? Where are you?
At the beach.
He's at the see, there, folks. If there were any doubt about why the Iberian ecosystem is the place to be, Nico just typified it through a technical error. But Itxaso, I see you closing a term sheet over there, so I want to loop you back in the conversation. I can see you doing it. I know you're doing a multi-million-dollar deal right now while we're live on air. It's fantastic. I want to get your opinion. Let's zoom out. Wow, I just used a industry buzzword. Let's zoom out while we circle back to a pan-European viewpoint. How does Iberia compare to the other markets that you engage with? Strengths, weaknesses, pluses, minuses?
So I think obviously it has some similar things and some differences. Clearly, I'm not at the beach. I'm in this little booth. Here there is no sun outside. But I mean, it is similar in terms of, I think the community everywhere in Europe is growing very fast, is moving very fast. I think there is a clear mobility and collaboration. I think Nico just mentioned some incredible corporates and multinationals based in Spain. And I think the mobility and the collaboration, some of those are the corporates that are moving faster and adopting technologies. I mean, Santander and BBVA, how many of us are looking at companies who are working in POC, selling to them? So they are the fast adopting corporates, and that's absolutely fantastic, right? In the mentality perspective, in that way. I think in terms of differences, I would probably say that apart from the sun and all of that that you already just mentioned and so on, I'd probably say that we could do with some larger funds that can follow up the investment of the earlier stage companies, not necessarily because it's necessary to stay in the country, but I do think that having some knowledge, right? I talk to companies and they are like, now I want some money, just more cash, and once we have the knowledge of the place, probably I just would need money. But in this case, they could provide some knowledge about the country. And there are many, I mean, I'm looking at companies right now in France and in Germany, and they're very attracted to work, in fact, with me, because I know Spain and maybe closer to Italy, and those markets where they want to enter them, and there are not that many investors who in fact understand that. So I think having more money, it is important. I think we also mentioned it a little bit, but one difference is the access, the very easy access to Latin America, to Latin market, and to be able to sell there very, very quickly. Latam and Europe. So it's right in the middle for both of them. And then obviously they have the opportunity of the US, which is something that all the European countries have, right? And I probably say that obviously lower cost of very talented people, you are able to build a company. I would probably say Europe in general is much more loyal than the US.
Okay.
So in terms of retention of employees and things like that. So I think that's a difference, maybe not with the Europe in general, but definitely with the US for sure.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you for that. I want to touch on something here because it's been mentioned a couple of times, and I've experienced it as well firsthand. Lisbon used to be cheap. It's not cheap anymore. Barcelona used to be tourist friendly. It's not so tourist friendly anymore. This is for all of you. Like, have the cost of living increases in Lisbon and Portugal abroad, and the I don't want to say anti-foreigner because that, we'll save that for Germany and their new government. So we'll say the anti-tourist movement in Barcelona. Have either of these developments affected companies' ability to recruit, to grow, to scale? Stefan?
I mean, not in my view. I think that ultimately the cost difference was quite large. It is now smaller compared to other markets, but the cost advantage is still there. And at the same time, really, I think it's part of our industry to sort of, in a way, contribute to the upgrading of the economy and the job creation. I mean, these people here are just as good as people anywhere else, so they should kind of, obviously the salaries needed to increase. I think this was a bigger problem in Portugal. So salaries were really low, so they increased more, and real estate prices as well, particularly with the incoming foreigner population. But I still see startups relocating here, recruiting people locally, and bringing sort of expats and people in here. So I think it was actually very positive for the economy, and hopefully it will have a sort of a trickle down effect on other parts of the economy. So I don't think we've lost totally the competitive cost thing. And overall for the economy, it's really important that salaries go up and that the average level of salaries and of the economy goes up, because we are South Europe, but we cannot be always behind the average or much lower than Northern Europe. So I think it's good.
Nico, any thoughts?
I think there's still a massive differential between the way somebody can live in Spain and or in Portugal and the way somebody can live in London, right? To have the same quality of life, you probably have to pay them 2 to 3 times more for London than you do here. And we are seeing that we see it not only in the portfolio companies, we see it even with our own, associates and principals we can bring in from business schools. We're bringing in people at salaries which Itxaso would probably faint on compared to what you have to pay out there in London, Itxaso. So I think that the cost angle is still there, but I think in the end, ours is not a cost business, right? Ours is about creating high quality companies and attracting not the most cost efficient, but the best talent ever for our companies. And I think that the attractiveness of Spain and Portugal is there. We see conversations happening all the time around our portfolio companies talking to potential CEOs, to potential senior management team members, with real interest from people for actually moving here again and again. And I think that works well. I think Portugal actually has a benefit over Spain. Spain, we have this little thing here about Barcelona versus the rest of Spain, and that actually, in our opinion, has harmed the attractiveness. Barcelona's attractiveness over the last years has declined. We now see more difficulty in bringing senior members to the teams in Barcelona than we do in Madrid or in other areas, because that kind of environment is not so productive, and doesn't help around things like schools and all of those different elements. It just creates another noise level which is not so helpful. And Portugal has a very homogeneous and consistent offer to the water's a little bit colder in the south than in the north, contrary to what one would think. But I think when you can choose Porto, Lisbon, South, those are great places to be, and with a very consistent offer in what they do, right? So we have teams that are with people living in the Algarve and Porto and Lisbon and and London and Madrid and across completely virtual, and the Portuguese ones are the ones that are really usually the most smiling ones on the conference calls.
Right. Okay. Good. Maybe colder water, but arguably better surf. Stefan and I can argue about that later. Nico, thanks for that. You did mention a couple times, I picked up schools and education. So I want to loop it back to Dr. De Palacio, and I do highlight that because anybody who has obtained that level of education, I respect it, and I do want to mention it. So maybe Dr. De Palacio, who is also, in addition to being a general partner at Notion, Itxaso is an associate professor at the University College of London. So perhaps maybe even best to speak on this topic. Itxaso, talk to me about some of the challenges. I mean, Nico just highlighted some, but in your opinion, what are some of the challenges facing startups in Iberia, and how do they compare to other European markets?
Yeah, so I would probably say that some of the challenges, maybe, let me think about it. First, I would probably say that the companies, I don't know. I'm trying to think what are the main.
There are no challenges in Iberia.
I'm just trying to think what are the main challenges that they in some cases, look, we've been talking a lot about the global market, but I think in some cases what I see is that some companies start pretty local and they have difficulties to grow internationally. So that's one of the things. The second thing I would probably say is that while we were talking about the quality of life, which is amazing, that also sometimes disturbs or creates some differences on the goals of the investors and the entrepreneurs when we build companies. And I think there is sometimes some misalignment. I'm not probably going to say that this is a challenge to start a business. It is a challenge for investors, and it is a challenge to build big global businesses. So we've seen a lot of small exits coming out, specifically from some of the Iberian countries, and that creates a challenge for everyone around the table when we are looking for big innovations and big businesses that are global category leaders. And that, I don't know if that is, I really can't say if that is related to the good quality of life. Because obviously if someone is making 10 million, 20 million, and you have a pretty low cost of living, and you have an incredible life. So I think that is something that creates definitely a little challenge.
Is it fair to say that the quality of life in Iberia is almost counterproductive to getting the work done that needs to get done? I mean, Microsoft was based and grown in Seattle, where the weather is absolutely beautiful all the time. Not a coincidence, right? So is the lifestyle too good to build?
I wouldn't say that. I think people work really hard. In fact, people work really, really hard on the time during the time they are building the company. I mean, there is no like going around and no. I mean, my founders are working really hard, and founders that I made, I work really hard. And I think, in fact, I'm going to point to an article that was written by a media that you all know, talking about Typeform in Barcelona and accusing them from being in Barcelona because of their good quality of life, and maybe they had to fire people because they couldn't reach the revenues. That is not true. That's I mean, I found out, reduced the article, and I think many of you read it. And look, companies fire people because they need to be stable. Revenues need to follow the growth of the company, and that's what they need to do when they need to do it. There's no need for media to be making any noise around that. Nobody likes to fire people. Let's put it this way. Yeah. So, but they were mentioning that point of not having committed people and too much beach time. I don't think that is the case. I think Stefan is going to jump into that.
I agree with Itxaso. I think there's a number of issues here which form, challenges. I think the number one issue is that, again, these are younger ecosystems. You have less role models. I think until 5 years ago, 10 years ago, there were really no success cases. So when you're starting a company, if you haven't seen it happen, if you haven't seen people doing these massive exits, you don't believe in it. When I came back to Portugal 10 years ago, we were starting. I met, for example, Christina, who is my co-founder here at Indico, and she founded TalkDesk, and then she founded another company that she sold to Zendesk. She was one of the first founders to say, I want to go global in Silicon Valley, and I want to build a unicorn with her partner, Tiago. And they did it, but there's just so few, and there's actually been so few big major exits. So we feel that the entrepreneurs still don't see, they see the entrepreneurs in the US and sometimes in North Europe, but you need to see local entrepreneurs doing massive exits so that you believe that you can do it yourself. So it takes time for the wheel to sort of turn, and there's very few repeat entrepreneurs. And I think this is where sometimes the level of ambition is a little bit lower, because the examples are just not as close to home as they are in other countries. But this will change with time and with exits and with money being made by entrepreneurs and investors and so on, which is just starting. Funds are, all these funds are 5-10-year-old funds, right? It's just the ecosystem is just starting, and we can't move faster than this. The second thing is, I think there's still a problem with capital. As Nico and Itxaso were saying, the local funds are still fairly small compared. They should be a bit bigger, and they're starting to develop the expertise, but there are no LPs in the region. It's extremely difficult to fundraise for funds, so it's difficult for the funds to grow, and so you need access to capital. And the truth is, when we see funds based out of London or New York or the Valley coming over to Iberia, the bar is higher. They would demand more numbers, more traction, and more explosive growth to invest in Iberia as opposed to investing in their local markets, because that's not in nature. It's normal human nature that you're used to your market. In your market, you're more comfortable with the risk. In other markets, you're less comfortable with the risk. So for the Iberian startups to really get on the radar of these major funds based out of London or out of Silicon Valley, they need to see explosive growth. And that's hard, right? So it's harder. The bar to attract capital in Iberia is much, much, much harder. The last thing, which I think is a more long-term issue and that is kind of a little bit more worrying, is that 10 years ago, you're competing for SaaS solutions or mobile apps. Nowadays, you're competing for generative AI and sort of really, really deep tech. And that worries me a little bit more, because I think that we're no longer talking about the same sort of technological advantage or disadvantage or competitiveness that we were when we saw the first unicorns coming out of Iberia in the last 10 years. I think now we're seeing a different competitive landscape. And there, I'm not so sure that Europe in general and South Europe in particular are ready for that battle. So I think we have to go back into the drawing board and think about universities, about deep tech and so on, because there I think we're falling behind a little bit in terms of the quality of the deal flow in Europe and particularly in South Europe. So I think we were more competitive 10 years ago when it was easier to innovate. And I think it's getting harder and harder to become competitive. So the bar is going higher. So I think there's issues which are fundamentally of time, role models and funds getting bigger and so on with results. But I think we're now entering a stage where I'm a bit uneasy about, the quality of deal flow when we're talking about, really, really complicated stuff and being a global category leader in categories that are totally new and super deep tech.
Yeah.
In fact, Nico started talking, and Nico, you started investing 20 years ago, and you've invested a lot in cyber. This is an area that in Spain has a heritage, and there were probably many more companies in cyber at the time. And maybe we are seeing less and less and much more thinner application layers. I think countries like France, for example, and it comes down to what Stefan is mentioning, I think they've done incredibly well from the education side to really integrate all this deep tech. And it's not a coincidence that some of the Mistrals and the H company and so on are coming out of there. And I think probably that is a very good point. And I think that's why we are not seeing that much cloud infrastructure, cloud and AI companies or deep tech companies either.
Yeah. Great. Thanks for that both. And I'm super happy to hear deep tech. I'm super happy to hear AI, because it's the pink elephant in the room that we absolutely cannot ignore. Nico, we haven't heard from you in a bit, so I'm wondering if you can chime in. What is to be done in Europe? I mean, can Europe compete with the Americas and quite honestly, China? What needs to happen, or do we just say, you know what, we can't keep up with this, we're just going to go look elsewhere?
I don't know
Small
the answer
question.
to that. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not even going to pretend that I know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
But I think there are several factors that impinge on what is going to happen in the future. One is, as Stefan pointed out, the educational substrate, I don't believe that the educational substrate is lesser now in Southern Europe, simply because the access to the content is totally global. So those students that have the curiosity and the ability can just go out and get it. 100% of MIT's courses are available online for free.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Different from having been admitted to MIT and going to MIT, et cetera, et cetera. But the availability of the content is global. I think it's normal that a country with, like Portugal with 8 million people has a lesser density of not density, the lesser number of people that are at that same level in the US, where the density of universities, et cetera, is just huge. And therefore, the ability also to fund all those research programs, et cetera, is just much greater in the US than it is elsewhere. And China, it's all government funded. So they, of course, have a huge benefit. But I don't think there's a structural difference in the populations that makes it more difficult for them to compete on these areas. What I think, if I look back in history, similar thing happened with the semiconductors. If you remember, semiconductors were a hot investment area in 2005, 2008. We, in fact, made investments in semiconductor in Europe, and we made money on our semiconductor investments in Europe in our first fund. And we didn't do any in the second fund or the third fund. You went from technologies down to the 65 nanometers, which were you could do a mask for $500,000. So a startup with $2 million in investment could go out and build out chips. I have chips on my desk from one of our startups, which was a company called Elastics. In elastic clocks, very advanced. They did a tape out with TSMC. It cost them $250,000, right? 65 nanometers. As all the SoCs moved into the sub 10 nanometer geometries, that wiped out the ability of any startup to do anything in that area. What's happening now with the LLMs is something similar, right? The ability to go out and build an LLM is prohibitive. So what's got to happen is the same effect as when edge computing started coming along and created a renewed need for the higher geometries and going back to some of the basics. That same phenomena is going to happen. I don't know what it's going to look like, but that same phenomena will happen in cloud computing and in AI, because you will need that pushing the technologies out to the edge. You can't have it all centralized in the same way. The LLMs are gone forever, and they'll always be, the same way TSMC has a monopoly and makes Taiwan so important geostrategically. Is going to happen with LLMs as well. That's why countries are building their LLMs. That's why Saudi Arabia's gone out and built its LLM. Those are. If we think AI is building LLMs, then that's not going to be. That's gone for the whole smaller company ecosystems. But I think if we are patient and we build up the content capability and the ability of people to understand what's going on, you're going to have a lot of stuff that has to be developed all around that, and all the wrapping that has to come around it. And that's going to be very profitable for funds, by the way, because those are going to be companies where we can make real money, which, by the way, is the end objective of all funds. Sometimes, I know we're sometimes very
That's
focused
crazy
on the entrepreneurs, but we have to remember that the objective here is to get into companies at reasonable valuations and to sell them at reasonable valuations. So, we talk a lot about unicorns, but we at Adara believe that dragons are a lot more important than unicorns. And in the end, what you want is the ability to have companies which have enough growth in the course that you follow with them as a fund, in order to generate a very significant return and be able to recycle all that money back into the system and continue the whole wave. And I think that is going to happen with AI. So I'm actually not worried at all. I'm just conscious that we have to figure out when that opportunity is going to come and what it's going to look like.
Yeah. All right, good. Stefan, I saw you kind of flagging. Do you have something to add here?
No, there was just a fly that was flying here, and I just wanted to get out.
Well, fair enough. Okay, but as long as I got you here, Nico highlighted semiconductors. Can you point out some deep tech successes? Because maybe I've painted the picture a bit doom and gloom, and that's my journalism sensationalist story, kicking in. But Itxaso and Stefan, and I'm also mindful of the time. Talk to us about some of the deep tech successes that have come out of Iberia, or maybe even ones that are in the works that we should be keeping our eyes on right now.
I mean, I don't need to go very far because in my portfolio, obviously, we have Bubble, which, as Nico said, LLMs have been with us for a long time.
Right.
So they've been doing machine translation and using LLMs for that. And it is a company that does exactly that. So has built LLMs for machine translation in-house, and they are training those models with a human in the loop. And so the first application that they use, or the most common applications, is on the customer service space. But basically what they do is you have a centralized customer service that only speaks one language. That can be English, but it can be Spanish, Filipino, whatever it is. And so they get tickets, they answer in their own language, and it is translated or corrected by a semi-professional translator on their phone before it goes to the customer, which retrofits to the algorithm and continues to create a better user experience. So this company grew pretty fast. In COVID, it got a little bit to a plateau, but now has started again to grow a lot. And we are, I mean, even though other LLMs are out there, the translation has still a way to go in many countries, in many languages, sorry, because obviously there are a lot of long tail languages that is not Spanish or English or Portuguese, you know what I mean? And all the rest are still pretty clunky. So yeah, that's an example based in Lisbon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's our common company between Indico and Notion. We co-invested at Series A, and actually I would add another one in our portfolio, Anchorage, which shows how the Portuguese and Spanish diaspora are so important, and this is why we invest so many times in the US, because this is a company that is basically a custodian for crypto assets. The first federally chartered crypto bank in the US, so Anchorage Digital, started by a Portuguese and an American founder in the US, but with a strong team here in Portugal and nowadays all over the world, and invested by some of the best funds in the world and by many global financial institutions as well. And it shows that I think the Iberian ecosystem is really not only about the people that are here. We always say that we invest in these Southern European countries, but also in the Portuguese, Spanish, and Italians all over the world, and all the foreigners that live in these countries. So it's pretty global. Although there is a regional focus, the truth is, as Nico was saying, these companies are global from day one way or the other. Either it's because the people are from all over the world, or because they have multiple offices, remote or not remote, all over the world. And quite often, some of our best investments and some of our unicorns, if not all of them, they've been American to a certain extent, co-founded by Iberian founders and then American founders.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you. It looks like we've got time for one more question, and I'm gonna skip down the list of questions, obviously, to the one that I always love asking anybody that I interview, because this is your chance to either get it horribly, horribly right or horribly, horribly wrong. So from each of you, I'll pose the question. Look into your crystal ball. Tell me what the Iberian startup and VC system looks like 5 years from now. Itxaso, go.
I definitely think there will be 3 to 5 category leaders in different areas. For sure, we will be able to see some of those. I would probably say funds a little bit bigger too.
There we go. All right, good. Stefan, what do you think?
I would add to that in 3 to 5 years, there will be a few IPOs and major exits coming out of Iberian companies that we had not seen before, because they'll be ripe for exit in the next 3 to 5 years, particularly when the next IPO window opens up.
Okay, let's really gamble right now. Give me 2 names, and we'll come back 3 to 5 years from now and watch this and see if you're right. 2 names of companies that are going to IPO within the next 3 to 5 years that hail from Iberia. Go.
The 2 that we just mentioned, I think that Anchorage Digital and Babel are good candidates in our portfolio, for example.
All right, putting my bets in on Anchorage right now. All right, Nico, anything different? Come on, be controversial. Tell me that Stefan and Itxaso are totally crazy and that it's going to go in a completely different direction.
No, I think it is gonna go in that direction. We're gonna have good exits as soon as the markets start recovering. I think there's this storm that's happening now is important because it creates good culling opportunities. And there's going to be a lot of culling in the companies, in the portfolios, but there's also going to be culling at the fund level, because funds, have to generate returns, and there are a lot of funds in the ecosystem which are very recent vintages. So, funds that are in first generation or second generation, particularly the ones that are in first generation, they need to really get themselves together to raise their second fund and move forward. And I think one of the things that we're going to see, is a polarization where you're going to see some of the funds that have 5, 6, 7 generations under their belt will become more and more consolidated and will have bigger funds, and that will go in the line that Itxaso was saying, the ability to have much larger groups with assets under management originating from Spain. But also I think you're going to start seeing some culling in those funds that, are not able to go out and raise. And therefore, in our industry as well, the same as it happens with our portfolio companies and the startups, it's a polarization that keeps the quality. So the important thing for us as managers is to try to be in the first category, not in the second category. But one of the things that really differentiates the US ecosystem or the UK ecosystem is that you have funds that are in the 10th, 12th, 13th, 14th, or 15th generation, which, they can have a bad fund. It doesn't really matter if Sequoia has, one vintage that is not so good. It's still going to be Sequoia and it's still going to keep going. I think a lot of the funds that are, the ones we're talking around the table, we're still sort of a little bit in the danger zone of if we have a bad vintage, then, it might be difficult. I think we need to get ourselves to the point when we're, with all the due respect and distance to somebody like Sequoia, we have that staying power of a well-diversified, well-established, and where our track records have the sufficient breadth and scope and depth that we can continue to convince investors globally to come to our funds. And I think that's our biggest challenge at the moment. Actually, well beyond even the challenge of finding companies and so on and so forth. I think our biggest challenge is how, as funds, we build out our strategy, and as fund managers, how we get up to the levels of assets under management that we need to have to be sustainable.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that. A painful factor in all economics, but more often than not, a necessary one. Ladies, gentlemen, I know we are running out of time. Itxaso, she just got the term sheet back. She totally disagrees with it. She's got to go run that by legal. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for sharing your expertise and your insights on the Iberian ecosystem. Take us out, tell folks where they can get in touch with you, where they can follow you, where they can like you, where they can tell Sequoia that, no, I want to go with Notion, or whomever. Itxaso, take us out. Tell us where folks can find you.
So usually I answer in LinkedIn. In fact, it's probably the best way to find me. For sure, you can just message me, and we can talk for sure.
Very good. Nico, where can folks find you?
Same here, on the beach.
On the beach? I'll be right over. All right, LinkedIn.
To deepen the theory that Spaniards spend their time on the beach.
Wait a minute, that was a controversial topic. Hang on. All right, Stefan, take us out. We got 50 seconds left if I get it on the mark.
Look, apart from seeing me surfing outside somewhere here around Lisbon, you can find me on LinkedIn. And if you want to send us your pitch deck, just go to our website. There's a bunch of emails like futureunicorn@indicocapital.com. Just send us your company.
All right, very good. Again, that has been it. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dan Taylor. Yours is not. That is all the time we have for today. And hopefully the engineers behind the scenes will get this right. But that is it, folks. We are out of here. And thank you for joining.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.